I woke up to the sound of my alarm blaring, and there it was, another ordinary day ahead. But something felt different. The moment I sat up, I read a notification. Think like a genius. I paused. Could I? Was this some sort of challenge? It was a simple message, but I couldn't shake the thought. What did it really mean to think like a genius? Was it about being born with a rare brain or possessing some hidden, secret talent? Or was it something everyone could develop? The thought kept bouncing in my mind. Maybe being a genius wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about being curious. I decided that today I would try. I was going to spend the entire day asking myself, how can I think like a genius today? I started by asking, what does a genius do that I don't? I wasn't expecting any earth-shattering answers right away, but I knew that if I paid attention, something would click. Geniuses are always asking questions. They see the world differently. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I realized one important thing. You don't have to be born a genius to think like one. It's about nurturing your mind, asking the right questions, and seeking deeper understanding. It's a process, not a destination. I began to look around me, my cluttered room, the chaos of my desk, and thought about how geniuses must approach everything. I decided that I would stop seeing my everyday tasks as boring and instead look at them as opportunities to innovate and learn. For the first time in a long while, I asked myself, what could be improved about this? I wasn't just thinking about my physical surroundings, though. My mind was starting to shift, trying to find ways to make everything around me a little better. I opened my notebook and wrote down a question. How can I think differently about the things I do every day? It was an open-ended question, but it was the first step in allowing myself to think beyond the routine, beyond what I knew. I had begun the journey. Later, I went out for a walk, still thinking about the idea of genius. What makes someone great at what they do? It didn't seem like it was about innate talent. Instead, it was about dedication and curiosity. They never stopped questioning, never stopped learning. I stopped at a cafe, ordering my usual coffee, but the moment I sat down, I realized something. Thinking like a genius meant embracing discomfort. It meant questioning things that everyone else just accepts. It meant being okay with not knowing. By now, I was truly in it. My mind was firing on all cylinders, connecting ideas that hadn't crossed paths before. Each new thought felt like a breakthrough. But it wasn't perfection. It was simply the process of diving deeper, asking questions, and seeking answers. I had started my day with an open mind, but now I was on a mission to ask the most difficult questions I could think of. What would happen if I could ask better questions? I quickly realized that a genius isn't someone with all the answers. They ask the best questions. As I sat at my desk, I thought about how often I accepted things at face value. Why do I always do things this way? What would happen if I tried a new approach? It became clear to me. Genius lives in the questions, not the answers. The right question opens new doors. I scribbled down more questions in my notebook. Why do we assume that mornings are harder for some people? What makes a book so compelling? I realized that asking questions wasn't just a way to gain knowledge. It was a way to challenge my own thinking. It was like unlocking a treasure chest. The more questions I asked, the more my brain started to see patterns, connections, and possibilities. In the past, I had just followed routines without thinking twice. Now, I was exploring every little detail with curiosity. In a way, asking questions forced me to take a step back and look at everything in a new light. I began to feel like I had opened a secret door in my mind. Suddenly, I wasn't just going through the motions of my day. I was actively looking for ways to improve them. As I went through the day, I paid attention to the world around me with a new sense of wonder. How does this work? Why is it the way it is? Geniuses don't just accept the world as it is, they explore it. They dig deeper, asking what could make things better or more efficient. I even asked myself, what makes this moment worth remembering? It's easy to forget the beauty of everyday life. But when you start asking these questions, you realize that there is something extraordinary in every moment. A genius finds meaning in the simplest things. The more I asked, the more I began to see new opportunities. Even the smallest interactions with people became interesting. I wanted to know why people thought the way they did. What led them to their beliefs and actions? It was like seeing the world through a different lens. The key to thinking like a genius wasn't about having an instant answer. It was about being open to questioning everything. It was about exploring the unknown. Curiosity, I realized, was the bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary. When I thought about famous innovators like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, I realized they weren't just lucky. They were curious. They didn't settle for the world they inherited. They questioned everything and used their curiosity to change the world. I spent the rest of the day asking questions about my work, my relationships, and my goals. And I started seeing solutions I hadn't thought of before. By the end of the day, I had learned something new, not from finding the answers, but from asking better questions. Curiosity is the engine of genius. It's what pushes you to dig deeper into everything you see, hear, or experience. But it's more than just asking questions. It's about developing a mindset that sees curiosity as a superpower, not a weakness. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that genius is not about being gifted. It's about developing a deep curiosity about the world. When you truly want to understand how something works, you start seeing connections that no one else does. I started testing this theory in real life. Instead of just accepting things as they are, I began questioning everything. Why do I follow this routine every morning? Why do I believe certain things? It was like uncovering new layers of the world around me. Curiosity forces you to challenge what you know. It pushes you to ask the questions that are often ignored by others. It allows you to see solutions when others are stuck. Geniuses don't just understand. They want to understand why and how things work. It was about learning to embrace the unknown. In the past, I was afraid of not knowing, of feeling stupid for asking questions. But I realized that genius thrives in uncertainty. It thrives in asking questions without knowing what the answers will be. As I walked around the city that afternoon, I saw it differently. Why is this building shaped the way it is? What makes the traffic light system so efficient? Why do people walk the way they do on this street? These were ordinary things, but to a curious mind, they were treasures. Curiosity is contagious. The more I asked, the more the people around me seemed to notice. They started to ask questions too. It's a ripple effect. When you begin asking questions, you encourage others to do the same. Genius spreads when it's shared. I began noticing the hidden beauty in my everyday life, things I had never seen before. I saw patterns in the way people moved through the streets. I noticed how a piece of music could change the mood of an entire room. The world was suddenly more fascinating. At work, I applied curiosity to my tasks. Instead of just completing projects, I started asking, how can this be done better? What if we tried a different approach? Even small tweaks had big impacts. Curiosity unlocked new solutions to old problems. It was like a switch had been flipped in my mind. Suddenly, I wasn't afraid of failure. I was eager for it. Each failure was an opportunity to learn something new, to refine my thinking. Genius doesn't fear failure. It embraces it because failure leads to knowledge. Later that evening, I realized something else about curiosity. It doesn't have to be about big ideas. Sometimes, genius is about small, everyday questions. What if I changed the way I talk to people? What if I listened more than I spoke? These small adjustments could lead to breakthroughs. The key to thinking like a genius, I realized, is learning to nurture curiosity every day. It's about looking at everything, no matter how small, with fresh eyes. If you train your mind to be curious, you begin to see the world in a whole new way. By the end of the day, I had learned more than I expected, not because I had all the answers, but because I asked better questions. The simple act of being curious had opened up a new world of possibilities. And that, I realized, was the first step to genius. Persistence is one of the most powerful qualities of a genius. It's not just about raw talent or flashes of brilliance. It's about the will to keep going when things get hard, to keep asking questions and searching for answers, no matter the setbacks. At first, the idea of persistence seemed simple. Just keep going, right? But as I thought about it more, I realized that persistence wasn't always about working harder. Sometimes, it's about working smarter, finding better ways to push forward when obstacles arise. I had spent the day asking questions and embracing curiosity. But as the hours passed, the frustration started to build. There were things I didn't understand yet, things I couldn't solve. It would have been so easy to give up. But that's not what a genius does. Geniuses don't stop when they hit a roadblock. They don't give up when things get difficult. Instead, they persist. They find different angles, new solutions, and ways to keep moving. And as I thought about this, I realized that I was already on my way. Every question I asked was a step toward understanding. Even if I didn't have the answers right away, I knew that persistence was the key to unlocking them. It wasn't about getting it right on the first try. It was about continuing to try, no matter how many mistakes. I went back to my work, determined not to give up. There were problems that felt impossible, but instead of running from them, I embraced them. I took a breath, adjusted my approach, and started again. Persistence meant adapting, not just pushing blindly ahead. Persistence, I realized, is also about knowing when to change direction. It's about being flexible, willing to learn from failure and apply those lessons. I started making notes about what wasn't working and used them to find better solutions. Failure was just feedback. As the day went on, I began to see the power of persistence not just in my work, but in my life. I thought about the times I had given up too soon, on projects, ideas, relationships. But now, I knew that persistence could have changed those outcomes. I felt more determined than ever. It was like a switch had flipped in my mind. I started to see obstacles as challenges to overcome, not reasons to quit. Geniuses don't give up. They persist until they get where they want to go. And now, I was ready to do the same. By the time I wrapped up my work for the day, I was amazed at how much I had achieved. It wasn't about working faster or harder. It was about staying consistent. I had turned frustration into motivation, and persistence had led me to breakthroughs. I realized something important about persistence. It's not just about keeping at it until you get what you want. It's about falling in love with the process, understanding that the struggle is part of growth. Genius doesn't happen overnight. It's built step by step. I went to bed that night feeling proud, not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned that persistence was the real key to genius. It was the ability to keep going when things were hard, and to embrace failure as a step toward success. Focus is the secret weapon that geniuses use to unlock their true potential. In a world filled with distractions, the ability to concentrate deeply on a task is rare. But that's exactly what makes genius possible, staying locked into the task at hand. At first, I thought that genius was all about talent, but I soon realized it's about more than that. It's about dedicating your energy to one thing, blocking out all the noise, and fully immersing yourself in your work. Focus is the foundation of progress. As I sat down to work, I made a conscious decision to focus. I shut down all notifications, closed my emails, and removed all distractions. It wasn't easy. I could hear my phone vibrating in the next room, tempting me to check it. But I resisted. The more I focused, the more I realized how much my mind had been wandering in the past. I was always multitasking, always jumping from one task to the next. But real genius, I realized, isn't about spreading your energy thin. It's about giving your best to one thing. I began working with intensity, but also with a calm mind. It wasn't about forcing myself to focus. It was about choosing focus. I worked for longer periods without feeling drained because I was fully present in what I was doing. Focus made everything flow. It wasn't just about work either. Focus applies to all areas of life. I started focusing on the people around me, listening deeply when they spoke. Instead of thinking about what I was going to say next, I was truly hearing them. This is focus in action. As I continued to focus on my tasks, I realized how much I had been missing in the past. How often had I rushed through tasks, distracted by my phone, by worries, by everything else? Real genius is in the small details, the things you notice when you truly focus. Focus doesn't just help you achieve more in less time. It sharpens your mind. When you're focused, your mind works more efficiently, making connections that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. Genius doesn't come from working faster. It comes from working smarter. I tested this theory again, this time with a creative project I had been putting off. I locked myself in a quiet space, focused completely on the task, and let my ideas flow. It wasn't easy at first, but once I got into the zone, my creativity soared. Focus is about discipline. It's about resisting the urge to check your phone, to scroll through social media, to get distracted by random thoughts. Every time you refocus, you strengthen your mental muscle. Focus is a skill you can develop with practice. By the end of the day, I had completed tasks that I had been avoiding for weeks, and I wasn't exhausted like I usually would be. Focus had made my work feel effortless. I understood now that the power of focus wasn't in how much you do, but in how deeply you do it. I ended the day feeling more accomplished than I had in a long time. It wasn't about working harder. It was about focusing better. I had learned that genius isn't just about having ideas. It's about focusing long enough to make those ideas happen. Failure is often seen as the enemy of success. But if you look closely, failure is actually the key to unlocking genius. It's through failure that we learn, grow, and push our limits. Genius doesn't fear failure. It embraces it as a tool for growth. I had spent years avoiding failure. I feared it would make me look incompetent or unskilled. But today, I decided to change my perspective. I realized that every failure was an opportunity to learn something new, to refine my thinking. The most successful geniuses of all time didn't get everything right on their first try. In fact, many of them failed repeatedly before achieving greatness. Thomas Edison famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." I started to see failure not as an end, but as a beginning. When something didn't work, I didn't get discouraged. Instead, I asked myself, what can I learn from this? This simple shift in mindset helped me see failure as a necessary step on the path to success. I thought back to my past failures and realized how many times I had given up too soon. Every time something went wrong, I'd quit. But now, I knew that every setback was just a chance to get better. Geniuses fail, yes, but they don't stop failing. They keep going. With this new perspective, I tackled tasks that had once felt impossible. I didn't care if I failed. I cared about the lessons I would learn from it. Each attempt, no matter how imperfect, moved me closer to my goal. Failure wasn't a reason to quit, it was fuel. I made mistakes, of course. I stumbled, got frustrated, and even questioned myself at times. But every time I picked myself up and tried again, I got better. Genius isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about making those mistakes work for you. As I looked at my work, I realized something powerful. The more I failed, the more I learned. And with each lesson, I became a little smarter, a little more skilled. Failure had pushed me to grow in ways success never could. I had embraced it fully. By now, failure didn't feel like a setback. It felt like an essential part of the process. The best part was that I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had learned to expect it, to welcome it. After all, if you're not failing, you're probably not trying hard enough. That night, I reflected on the day. I had failed several times, but I didn't let it define me. Instead, I used it to fuel my progress. I had made mistakes, but each mistake had taught me something new. This is what it means to think like a genius. When I woke up the next morning, I felt different. I wasn't afraid of failing. I knew that every failure was another opportunity to get closer to my goals. Genius is about learning, adapting, and moving forward, no matter how many times you fall. I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Genius isn't about being perfect. It's about the ability to fail, learn, and keep going. Failure isn't the enemy of success. It's the key to unlocking the greatest breakthroughs. Imagination is often seen as a tool for artists and dreamers, but in reality, it's the cornerstone of genius. Geniuses don't just work with what exists, they imagine what could be. They envision new possibilities and create something entirely new. I've always believed that imagination was for creative types, not for practical problem solvers. But as I dug deeper into the concept of genius, I realized that imagination was the driving force behind all innovation. It's what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. Imagination allows you to see beyond the present moment. It lets you picture a world that doesn't exist yet, and then find ways to make that vision a reality. Geniuses don't just solve problems. They imagine new ways to approach them, transforming the impossible into possible. I decided to test my imagination today. Instead of focusing solely on the practical aspects of my work, I began thinking about what-ifs. What if I could build a new system for my daily tasks? What if I could make my work more meaningful? The ideas began to flow. The more I let my imagination roam, the more possibilities opened up. I imagined different futures, different ways of achieving my goals. And with each new idea, I felt excitement rise in my chest. This was the power of imagination. It turned challenges into opportunities. Imagination isn't just about creating new things. It's about reframing the problems you face. A genius doesn't see a wall. They see a door that can be opened. The more I used my imagination, the more I realized that my challenges weren't obstacles, but invitations to innovate. I went on a walk to clear my mind, but instead of focusing on the usual distractions, I started imagining what my ideal life would look like. What if I could live every day fully, without limitations? Suddenly, the world felt open, and I realized that everything was possible. The more I imagined, the more my mind expanded. I no longer felt confined to the same patterns and routines. My ideas weren't restricted by how things are supposed to be. I began thinking about how I could make the impossible happen, not someday, but today. Imagination isn't just a daydream. It's a form of problem solving. It's not enough to simply accept the world as it is. Genius comes from seeing things differently, from using your imagination to create better solutions, to innovate and make the world a better place. By the end of the day, I had a list of ideas, ideas that seemed impossible just yesterday. My mind was buzzing with new possibilities, new ways to approach my work and my life. This wasn't just about creativity. It was about thinking like a genius. As I reflected on the power of imagination, I realized that every breakthrough begins in the mind. Geniuses don't wait for permission to dream. They dream big and then turn those dreams into reality. They aren't bound by what is. They are driven by what could be. That night, I decided to make imagination part of my daily routine. Every morning, I would take time to imagine a better future. It wasn't about wishful thinking. It was about using my imagination to propel myself toward the life I wanted. Genius starts with vision. Imagination is powerful, but without action, it's just a dream. Geniuses understand that vision must be followed by action. It's not enough to imagine a better world or a better life. You have to take steps to make it happen. Action turns dreams into reality. I had spent the past few days imagining new possibilities, brainstorming ways to improve my work, and dreaming of a better future. But now, I knew it was time to take action. It was time to stop thinking and start doing. Genius isn't just about ideas, it's about execution. Taking action isn't always easy. It requires commitment, persistence, and sometimes a leap of faith. But I knew that if I wanted to truly think like a genius, I needed to push beyond my comfort zone. I couldn't let fear or uncertainty hold me back. So, I started with a small task. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment to begin, I simply dove in. I didn't worry about doing it perfectly. I knew that the first step was more important than the first result. Taking action would lead me closer to my goals. As I began to work on the task, I felt a surge of energy. It wasn't just about making progress. It was about feeling empowered. Every action I took brought me one step closer to turning my ideas into reality. Action creates momentum, and momentum drives success. The more I focused on taking deliberate action, the more confident I became. I no longer feared failure. Instead, I welcomed it, knowing that each mistake was a lesson. Genius doesn't avoid failure. It learns from it and uses it to fuel greater action. Taking action also meant being willing to make mistakes. It wasn't about waiting for the right moment or the perfect plan. It was about starting with what I had and refining along the way. The best way to learn is to take action and adjust as needed. As I worked through the day, I realized that genius isn't something you achieve overnight. It's a result of consistent, focused action over time. Every small step counts. Every effort builds upon the last. The more action you take, the closer you get to your goals. I decided that from now on, I wouldn't wait for things to fall into place. I would make them happen. Every task, every project, every idea needed action. Without action, even the greatest ideas would remain just that, ideas never realized or acted upon. By the end of the day, I felt accomplished. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had taken action. I had moved from dreaming to doing, from planning to executing. Genius is built through action, and today, I had taken that crucial step. I knew that tomorrow would be another opportunity to take action. But now, I wasn't afraid. I had learned that action leads to progress, and progress leads to success. If I wanted to think like a genius, I had to make action my constant companion. Geniuses don't rely on bursts of inspiration. Instead, they rely on consistency. It's not about working hard for a week and then taking a break. It's about showing up every single day, no matter how you feel. Consistency is the key to lasting success. At first, I thought that genius was about having a few brilliant ideas that changed everything. But now I realize that the true power of genius lies in the daily effort. It's the little things you do consistently that add up over time. I started to incorporate consistency into my own routine. I didn't set out to do anything grand. I focused on doing the small tasks well and consistently. I would wake up early, work on my goals every day, and remain dedicated to my progress. The first few days were challenging. I wasn't seeing dramatic results, and it was tempting to give up. But I kept reminding myself that genius wasn't about immediate rewards. It was about the process, the habits, and the commitment to keep moving forward. Slowly, the results began to show. The more consistently I worked toward my goals, the more I felt a sense of achievement. Even if progress was slow, it was steady, and that steadiness was creating a foundation for something bigger in the future. I started tracking my daily habits, focusing on what I could improve each day. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly. It was about doing something every day that brought me closer to my goal. Consistency kept me on track, even when motivation faded. The genius behind consistency is that it turns the mundane into something extraordinary. The small, repeated actions we take each day eventually compound into massive success. It's not about taking giant leaps. It's about those small, steady steps. Even when things got tough, I reminded myself that consistency was the answer. There were days when I didn't feel like working, when distractions seemed endless, but I pushed through. Consistency isn't about feeling motivated. It's about showing up, regardless. As the weeks passed, my progress was undeniable. Tasks I once found overwhelming were now second nature. My confidence grew because I could trust in my habits. Consistency had become my secret weapon. I was building my genius one small step at a time. I began to see that greatness wasn't achieved by one giant leap, but by small, consistent actions over time. Genius isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about showing up, day after day, and committing to the process. By the end of the month, I felt transformed. Not because I had suddenly become a genius, but because I had committed to consistent growth. Every day, I had done something to move closer to my goals. That, I realized, was the real power of genius. Now, I knew that success wasn't about big moments of inspiration. It was about the daily grind, the constant effort. Geniuses know that the only way to reach greatness is through small, consistent actions. I had learned that consistency was everything. Learning is the bedrock of genius. Every genius, whether an inventor, artist, or philosopher, has a mindset that values continuous learning. They understand that the more they know, the more they realize how much they still have to learn. For years, I thought I had to know everything before I could take action. I thought that geniuses had all the answers. But as I dug deeper into the concept of genius, I realized that true genius isn't about having all the answers. It's about embracing learning. Geniuses are lifelong students. They don't stop learning when they reach a certain point. They're always curious, always seeking new information, always striving to understand more. And that's when I decided I wanted to learn more every single day. I started by reading books on everything from history to science, from literature to technology. I didn't have a specific goal in mind other than to absorb knowledge. I realized that the more I learned, the more connected I felt to the world around me. Learning wasn't just about gaining facts. It was about expanding my mind. The more I learned, the more I saw the connections between different ideas. I started thinking in new ways, understanding problems from different perspectives. Learning opened new doors. One of the most important lessons I learned was that learning doesn't always happen in a structured way. Sometimes, It's about experimenting, trying new things, and seeing what works. Geniuses aren't afraid to fail. They learn from it and grow. I began to realize that learning isn't limited to books or classes. It's about being curious in everyday life. Whether I was talking to people, walking down the street, or working on a project, there were always lessons to be learned if I was open to them. The more I learned, the more I saw that genius doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from understanding that there's always more to learn. I began to embrace that. I didn't have to be an expert. I just needed to keep learning and evolving. Learning also made me more adaptable. As I gained new knowledge, I was able to approach problems from different angles, try new solutions, and see things from other people's perspectives. It gave me flexibility in thinking, which is crucial for problem solving. Every day, I made time for learning. Whether it was listening to a podcast, reading an article, or reflecting on my experiences, I was constantly expanding my knowledge. The genius of learning is that it never stops. There's always more to discover. I soon realized that the best geniuses weren't the smartest people. They were the most curious. They were the ones who never stopped learning, never stopped exploring new ideas, and never stopped seeking the truth. That was the key to their genius. By the end of the day, I had learned something new. It wasn't a huge breakthrough, but it was enough to remind me of the power of learning. Geniuses don't rest on their past knowledge. They grow, evolve, and expand their minds every day. And now, so would I. Observation is one of the most underrated qualities of a genius. It's easy to overlook what's right in front of you, but true genius comes from paying attention to the details, seeing patterns, and learning from the world around you. At first, I thought observation was just about noticing things. But I quickly realized that geniuses see more than just what's visible. They understand what's happening beneath the surface. They observe with intention, looking for deeper meaning. I decided to put my observation skills to the test. Instead of just going through the motions of my day, I started paying attention to everything. The way people moved, the sounds around me, the patterns in nature. I realized that the world was full of lessons. As I observed more closely, I noticed things I had never seen before. How my colleagues interacted, how certain decisions affected outcomes, and how small changes could make a huge impact. Observation isn't just about looking, it's about understanding. I began to notice connections between things I never thought were related. A conversation with a friend could spark an idea for work. A walk in the park could teach me something about leadership. Observation revealed hidden patterns in everyday life. The more I practiced observing, the more insights I gained. I saw solutions to problems I hadn't been able to solve before. I began recognizing patterns in my work, in my relationships, and in the world at large. Observation made me smarter, faster. But observation isn't just about being aware of the world. It's also about being aware of yourself. Geniuses observe their own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. They understand their strengths and weaknesses, and they use that self-awareness to grow. I started observing my own habits, noticing where I wasted time or energy. I realized that the small actions I took every day were shaping my results. Observation gave me the clarity I needed to make better decisions, improving both my work and life. As I continued observing, I became more mindful of the impact my actions had on others. I noticed how a small compliment could change someone's day, or how a kind gesture could strengthen a relationship. Genius comes from recognizing these subtle effects. Observation also taught me the power of perspective. I learned to look at situations from different angles, seeing problems and solutions from multiple viewpoints. Geniuses aren't fixed in their ways. They're flexible and open to new perspectives. The more I observed, the more I realized how much there is to learn from the world around us. Everything, from nature to human behavior, offers lessons. All we need to do is pay attention and ask the right questions. Observation is a gateway to genius. By the end of the day, I was amazed by how much I had learned simply by observing. Things that used to seem ordinary had become fascinating. Genius isn't just about knowledge. It's about seeing the world in a way that others don't. Adaptability is the ability to adjust to new circumstances, and it's a crucial trait of genius. Geniuses don't stick rigidly to one method or one idea. They evolve with the situation, always open to new approaches and perspectives. At first, I thought adaptability meant being flexible, but I soon realized that it's more than just being open to change. It's about embracing uncertainty, welcoming challenges, and finding new ways to solve problems, even when things don't go as planned. I decided to test my adaptability today. Instead of sticking to my usual routine, I embraced the changes in my schedule. I handled unexpected obstacles with grace, finding new solutions as they came. Adaptability wasn't about reacting, it was about thriving in change. The more I adapted to the shifts in my day, the more I realized that flexibility was my secret weapon. It wasn't about controlling everything. It was about being comfortable with the unpredictable and learning how to use it to my advantage. I started to see how adaptability played a role in every successful person's journey. They don't succeed by doing things the same way over and over. They succeed by adjusting, learning, and trying new things until they find the best way forward. Adaptability also means recognizing when something isn't working and being willing to let it go. I started asking myself, is this approach still the best one? If not, I quickly shifted my focus, trying something new. It was freeing to let go of old habits. I saw how quickly things could improve when I changed my mindset. Rather than resisting change, I began welcoming it. I looked for the opportunities in every shift, in every unexpected twist. That's where innovation lives, at the intersection of flexibility and change. The key to adaptability is not just reacting, it's anticipating. The more I adapted, the more I understood that change isn't random. It's part of the process. Geniuses don't wait for change to happen. They prepare for it and shape it with their actions. I realized adaptability wasn't just about work, it was about life. In my relationships, in my personal growth, in every aspect of my journey, being adaptable meant I wasn't stuck in the past. I was constantly evolving, learning, and becoming better. By the end of the day, I felt a sense of freedom. I had let go of old expectations and embraced the unknown. I had learned to flow with life rather than fight it. That, I realized, is the genius of adaptability, the ability to embrace change and use it as fuel. When I woke up the next day, I was ready to face whatever challenges came my way. Adaptability wasn't just a skill, it was a mindset. And I knew that the more adaptable I became, the closer I would get to achieving greatness. Self-belief is the foundation of genius. No matter how talented you are, if you don't believe in yourself, your potential will be limited. Geniuses are not defined by their natural abilities. They are defined by their belief in what they can achieve. At first, I wasn't sure how self-belief fit into the equation of genius. Wasn't it about knowledge, creativity, and persistence? But then, I realized that without belief in yourself, none of those qualities can reach their full potential. I started to think about the times I had held myself back. How often had I doubted my abilities? How many opportunities had I passed up because I wasn't confident enough? The truth was, self-doubt had kept me from reaching my full potential. I decided to change that today. I began to remind myself that I was capable. Every time a doubt popped into my head, I replaced it with a positive affirmation. I am capable. I am worthy. I am on the path to greatness. Slowly, my mindset started to shift. The more I believed in myself, the more confident I became. I stopped worrying about what others thought or whether I was good enough. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my actions, my effort, and my unwavering belief in my ability to succeed. Self-belief doesn't mean ignoring your weaknesses. It means embracing them and knowing you can overcome them. Geniuses don't see their weaknesses as limitations. They see them as challenges to grow. I started seeing my weaknesses as opportunities to improve. With self-belief, I started taking risks I wouldn't have dared to take before. I set bigger goals, made bolder decisions, and approached challenges with a new confidence. I realized that belief in myself was the key to unlocking my true potential. Believing in myself also meant trusting the process. It was easy to doubt when things didn't go as planned, but I knew that every step, every mistake, and every success was part of the journey. The key was to keep moving forward with confidence. As I continued to embrace self-belief, I began to see results. Tasks that once seemed daunting became manageable. I tackled problems with a fresh perspective, knowing that I could find a solution. Self-belief had become my greatest tool for success. By the end of the day, I had accomplished more than I expected, not because I had all the answers, but because I believed I could find them. Confidence wasn't about being perfect. It was about trusting myself to keep going, no matter the obstacles. I knew that self-belief would be a daily practice. Every morning, I would remind myself of my capabilities. Every challenge, every setback, would become an opportunity to reaffirm my belief in myself. Genius begins with knowing you have the power to succeed. Patience is often overlooked when it comes to achieving greatness, but it's one of the most crucial qualities of a genius. Geniuses know that results take time. They understand that progress is a slow, steady climb, not an instant leap. At first, I struggled with patience. I wanted immediate results. I wanted to see the fruits of my labor right away. But I soon realized that the real power of genius lies in the willingness to put in the work without expecting instant gratification. Patience teaches you to trust the process. It reminds you that real growth takes time, that you can't rush the journey. I started focusing on doing the right things consistently, without stressing over when I'd see results. The key was to keep moving forward. The more I practiced patience, the more I realized that setbacks and delays weren't signs of failure. They were just part of the process. Every step, every challenge, was a building block leading me closer to my goals. Patience turned frustration into motivation. I reminded myself that geniuses don't expect success to come easily. They know that greatness takes time. They embrace the slow burn of progress, knowing that their efforts will eventually pay off. This mindset shift changed how I approached every task. Patience also meant learning to celebrate small wins. Instead of waiting for a big breakthrough, I started appreciating the little victories along the way. Each small success was a step forward, and together, they created momentum toward my larger goals. I realized that impatience only slows progress. When you rush, you miss important lessons along the way. Genius doesn't rush. It takes the time to learn, to refine, to experiment. The more patient I became, the more I enjoyed the process of growing. As I worked on my goals, I focused on improving each day, even if the results weren't immediately visible. I knew that the small improvements would add up over time. Patience wasn't about waiting. It was about continuing to move forward with faith. By the end of the day, I had learned that patience was a form of strength. It wasn't about giving up or waiting passively. It was about staying committed, even when progress seemed slow. True genius is born from the persistence to stay the course. I woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of patience. I knew that success wasn't going to happen overnight, but that didn't mean it wasn't happening. Every action, every step forward, was progress. Patience was now my ally in this journey. Reflection is the final piece of the genius puzzle. It's not enough to take action, be patient, and learn. You must also take time to look back on your progress. Reflection helps you assess what's working, what's not, and what you can do better. At first, I thought reflection was just about thinking over past mistakes. But I soon realized it's more than that. Reflection is about understanding how far you've come and using that insight to plan your next steps. It's an essential part of the process. I started reflecting every evening, taking a few minutes to sit down and think about the day. What had I learned? What challenges did I face? What worked well, and what could I improve? This simple habit helped me refine my approach every day. Reflection also gave me a sense of accomplishment. I used to rush from one task to the next, never stopping to appreciate my progress. But by reflecting, I acknowledged my small victories, which fueled my motivation to keep moving forward. As I reflected more, I began to see patterns in my thinking and behavior. I recognized my strengths and areas for growth. This self-awareness allowed me to make better decisions and adjust my approach to problems, making me more efficient and effective. Reflection is also a way to check in with yourself. Am I on the right path? Am I staying true to my goals? It's easy to get caught up in the daily grind, but reflection allows you to zoom out, reassess your direction, and ensure you're moving toward your dreams. Every genius, from scientists to artists, takes time to reflect. They don't just work nonstop, they pause, evaluate, and adjust. Reflection is what turns effort into growth. Without it, progress is just movement. With it, progress becomes transformation. As I went through the habit of reflecting, I realized how powerful it was in creating clarity. I was no longer running blindly. I was moving with purpose, having identified what I could improve and what I was doing right. Reflection guided me forward. By the end of the week, I had a clearer vision of my goals. My reflections had helped me see the bigger picture, as well as the small tweaks I could make to accelerate my growth. Reflection was no longer just a habit, it was my roadmap for success. I ended my journey with one final reflection. Genius is not a destination, it's a process. It's about continuously improving, staying curious, and using the lessons from each day to push forward. With curiosity, patience, action, and reflection, anything is possible. The power of reflection had shown me the full picture. It wasn't enough to learn and act. It was about taking the time to understand what you've done and where you're going. With this, I knew I was ready to take on whatever challenges came next.